Hey guys, video 3, schemas unit, first unit. We were talking about body orientation today. So in the unit packet, if you guys have that, we've already talked about organ systems, some of the history. We've talked about homeostasis, negative, positive feedback loops. We've started doing kind of a write on necessary life functions. Didn't get to that last class, so we'll do that on the study day. I'll give you guys some time to give each other some feedback. That essay will be on the next summative. And today we're on this third one, the last real input day of content on body orientation. And we have some directional terms, some body plans, some regions and activities. So these three I've kind of split up, and this is the order we'll do it in, is what the agenda says. First, before we get there, before we get to all this fun stuff, I want to talk about two things. One's catechism questions, and I'll talk what that is, and I'll talk about today's notes will be a little bit different because they're all diagrams, so I might just have you do the notes on the diagram pages in your unit packet. So first, I'm changing it up a little bit this year. I'm doing some catechism questions. Catechism is a question and answer format way of learning, used all over the place from church to different educational philosophies. So I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to answer it, and usually the next question follows up in some way to the previous question. So it's a logical way of asking and answering questions. The first catechism question has to do with the main purpose of anatomy and physiology. So what is the main purpose of anatomy and physiology? First, I would love to have you guys write this in a place that is separate or special, maybe in the back of your spiral notebook or on sheets of paper that you don't take any other notes on besides catechism questions that you can kind of collate. A big thing is, what do you expect on future tests from this test? And my goal is to say, well, there are actually these things that I want you to all basically memorize that will repeat throughout the year. Usually the things you repeat are the only things you end up remembering. So what are the main things I want you to remember in college for anatomy or into your profession? Or when you teach your kids, lots of different reasons to remember this stuff. The catechism questions will be those key learnings throughout each of the units. I hope this is useful. We'll write them on these big things up here. I'll post them around the room. Again, just didn't have time to do it in class last time. So catechism question number 1, I would write that down. Write that question down. The answer is the main purpose of A&P, anatomy and physiology, is to understand the structure and function of organ systems in maintaining homeostasis. So there's a lot to that. Anatomy is the study of the structure, so maybe draw an arrow from the A, the anatomy, to structure, physiology to function. The anatomy comes from the Latin for dissect. So anatomy is basically means the physical dissection of the physical structure, understanding what it is, what it's called. And physiology is more about what it does. So structure, function, big theme in all of science. And we've already talked about organ systems, how that's kind of our current paradigm of what the most important thing is in the body, these organ systems working together. And homeostasis seems to be a pretty good summary of lots and lots of different life functions and compounds, lots of chemicals that we need to balance in our body. So it's the first catechism question. Second one is a follow-up. So if I'm saying, hey, the key of it is to maintain homeostasis, my next question logically is, how do these organ systems work together to maintain homeostasis? So this is the second question. So we can answer that by saying homeostasis is maintained by the collaborative function of organ systems in both negative and positive feedback loops. We mentioned in class that negative feedback loops are more common and that they immediately do the opposite of what was done. So if I have a spike in blood oxygen, my body has an opposite reaction to reduce blood oxygen. Positive feedback loops is like oxytocin and the baby. It goes more and more and more and more in that direction. And so in one sense, positive feedback loops doesn't provide homeostasis, but if a mother has a baby in her belly and it's growing and growing, she needs to get it out of her to maintain homeostasis or she will die. So it's more of a long-term homeostasis, where negative feedback is more short-term. So they're both needed. So organ systems affect these balance beams or the oxytocin kind of loop, positive feedback loop. So that's the second question. Things that come up that I would write on the side kind of for mastery. This first idea I think is linked to all the organ systems. So if that's men, rid, curls, or whatever acronym you used, to remember all the organ systems, I would write that on the side. I would write CCTOOO for organ systems, circling the second O for organ systems. Drawing arrows from the A to the structure, P to the function. Those are kind of the things on the side I would write linked to this catechism question. This one, I think homeostasis expands on the fact that there are negative and positive feedback loops. So drawing little balance beams on the bottom, a balance beam for negative feedback, and a cyclical loop for positive feedback. And talking about the 8 key life functions on the side. So for me, that was ridge m cubed from the last video. I would write that on the side. Those are key life functions that help me maintain homeostasis. And that's kind of like for mastery, to link those ideas together, link those acronyms and pictures and diagrams together. Okay, so moving on. Random thing about my family before we get into today's lesson really in earnest is this is pictures from this last weekend. This is my son, my oldest daughter, and my youngest daughter. See if you guys can remember their names. Some of you do know them and their ages. This is Luke, he's 10, he's in 5th grade. This is Enika, she's 4. This is Florence, and she's 2, or Flo, as we call her. We don't have a TV in our house. We have phones and computers that can go on and get onto Netflix and Amazon Video and YouTube and stuff, but we don't have a TV. And my wife and I were just talking this last weekend on how much time these guys spent. This is their ship. My son set up this ship with a captain's chair and a captain's wheel, and they had a whole bunch of different arrangements back here with seating, and she has a potty, so she's going potty training in the little bathroom area, and she's more excited about going potty. And they didn't waste any time in front of the TV, and it was amazing how busy the weekend was just playing with them. She'd only let me clip her fingernails on the ship. But anyways, I love being a dad. I think being a parent is oftentimes thrown under the bus like it's a burden, and it is a burden, but it's a lot of fun also. Okay, so quick intro before we get into the main outline of the day. In your unit packet, I'll get your unit packet out. I would recommend to even just go through and take notes on this. If you are a crazy note taker, do some extras, that's fine. If it organizes your thought better, do it there. But I think for most of this, you can just do it on these sheets. These sheets are coloring pages from Kaplan Medical that I've copied. All of the answers are right down here. I don't want to hide anything here. You can use this. I would say I want to model how to do this eventually. I think coloring is a really common technique that helps a lot of people. It helped my mom get through to be a phlebotomist. It helped my uncle get through to be a physical therapist. Some of you guys are that way. I want to encourage you and even require it of you to see if coloring is a way to help study. So all of these are related. All of those 5 pages were related to what we're doing today. So I would just take notes on there as we go through, and they're in the right order. Okay, so first one is body planes, and body planes is the first schema within this body orientation schema. So last year I had like 8 or 9 schemas, and I arranged them in 3 similar days. So body orientation is like a big bucket, and planes is like the first schema within. So one way we talk about the human body is how do you split something, all the different ways of splitting something in terms of planes, like 3-dimensional planes. So if I take a picture, and the main reason for this, the goal for this, is when you take an X-ray or an fMRI or a PET scan, whatever it is, you have to say, well, what view is that from? So if you can imagine this plane, if I cut this person from left to right, this plane, the median or mid-sagittal plane separates the left from the right. And so you have now just cut them in half. So imagine a katana cutting a person in half. And you're taking a picture of their spine, their insides, their pelvis, and you're looking at it from the side. You're looking at either their right side or their left side. And so it's useful when you take pictures of things to talk about planes. The other one I would add to these notes, so if you want to color in that plane on your unit packet, go for it. The other one besides mid-sagittal, I'll talk about mid-sagittal a lot. The other one's parasagittal. So this is the sagittal plane, is anywhere you separate left to right. Mid-sagittal is directly down the midline. Parasagittal is anywhere off of the midline. So if someone cuts my arm off, like in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when the Black Knight gets his arm cut off, I'll use his arm for now. His arm cut off. His arm is being cut off in the parasagittal plane because it's not in the midline, but it's still left to right. Second plane is the frontal or coronal plane. I'll use this the most for frontal. You're taking your front off. So if you can see this person's front, this is now cutting, a katana has now cut me from the side and my face falls off, or my body falls off, you can actually see the lungs and the heart. You can see the stomach right here, this big giant liver right here, all of the spleen around the side. And so that's a useful one. Again, I'll use frontal most often, but coronal is a synonym. So for meats, I would memorize sagittal, coronal, and probably cross-section. For mastery, I would know all the synonyms also. So frontal, coronal. The last section is when the Black Knight in Monty Python is cut, and his legs are cut off. That is separating top from bottom. That is called a cross-section. That is in the transverse plane. So that's our last dimension, the third dimension. And so this is, if you imagine this person being cut off, this is now looking, we'll go over this in class, I think, but this is looking up into their cavity. So you've just chopped them off and you're now looking up into their abdomen with this picture. This is their spine, their liver, their spleen. Pretty interesting. So that's the first schema, that's planes. I would finish that coloring sheet in your unit packet, take 2 or 3 minutes. Don't be perfectionist unless you are. You can take longer. Second schema is a directional term. So if I say as a medical professional that something is more towards the midline or more towards the outside of the body, or closer up the leg towards the hip, or further away down towards the leg, down towards the foot, I want directional terms for that. So there's we use directional terms all the time in medicine. This is one of the most helpful schemas for the rest of the year. So this one I think is a neat picture. It has some directional terms that I don't use. Radial and ulnar, fibular and tibial directional terms I don't use. The book doesn't have. I thought that was a neat term to say all these arrows, posterior, anterior, cranial, caudal. But I'm gonna do something that matches more like the book. Again, this is in your textbook. Look at that unit packet cover to see the page numbers. So it'll say on there, all this stuff can be found in your book between pages 15 and 22 for this section. So you could go there too, now that you guys have your book. So the ones we will do, and let me just name them off so you can just hear me say it. This is a little bit more memorization. Superior is the top. If you are a superior and an inferior, most jobs you guys will get in high school, you will feel like an inferior. A good boss won't make you feel that way, but you are still inferior in that they have more authority than you do. So superior, inferior separates top and bottom. My head is more superior than my chin. My chin is more inferior than the top of my head. That's one directional term. Another one, let's talk about anterior, posterior. Okay, so we talked about superior, inferior, anterior, posterior. My sternum is more anterior to my vertebra, to my backbones. My backbones are more posterior or dorsal to my sternum. My calf muscle is dorsal to my shin. My shin is ventral to my calf. So there's lots of uses for this, and we'll talk more in class about why memorize all this stuff. Again, for meats, anterior, posterior, totally fine. I think ventral, dorsal for mastery, definitely. Dorsal, you might think of dorsal fin. Dorsal is on the back of the dolphin or the whale. That's an easy way to remember dorsal. Another one, besides superior, inferior, another synonym for that, to go back, would be caudal and cranial. Caudal is a word for the tail, and cranial is head. Or cephalad is another synonym. Cephalad, C-E-P-H-A-L-O-D, is another one, towards the head. So towards the cranium or towards the caudal. The cauda equina is the end of your nerves in your vertebra. It kind of fans out like a horse's tail. So caudal means towards the tail. Another one is proximal distal. My shoulder is proximal to my elbow. It's proximal. It's closer to the midline of my body. My elbow is distal, is more distal than my shoulder. Another one. So that works for the arms, and that works for the appendages, like my arm. That works for my leg. My knee is distal. My hip is proximal. So that's another useful one. So it knocks out these purple ones right here. Medial lateral, my armpit is medial. My hand is lateral. So this is more towards the midline, medial, away from the midline, lateral. Intermediate would be one in between. My elbow is intermediate between my armpit and my hand. So medial, intermediate, lateral. But my pectoralis major is medial to my armpit. So it's all relative. This is more towards my pec major muscle is more towards the midline than my armpit is. My armpit is more lateral than my pec major is. So those are some useful directional terms. Again, in your book, you have a more robust, detailed account of these. So I mentioned cephalad. I spelled that wrong, actually. A-L-A-D. There's no O there. So there's different synonyms. Know those for mastery. I think I talked about each one of them except for this last one. So superficial, deep. If you've ever met a superficial person, you say they're skin deep. So superficial means just on the outside. It's like a nice candy coating. There's no depth to them. So deep means internal. So my skin is superficial to my bones. My bones are deep to my skin. So my integumentary system is by necessity superficial. My cardiovascular system is by necessity deep. But even within my blood vessels, there's outer layers, outer membranes. The blood is deep to my blood vessel. My blood is deeper inside of me than my blood vessel. And that's all the directional terms. That's number 2. So I'd review that. I would do that page, that coloring page on in your unit packet for that. Third one is surface regions. So there's a lot of surface regions. I challenge you actually to pause the video, go to your unit packet, and try and fill out before you even go there. Try and go out and fill out the unit regions, the surface regions that you already know, that you're already familiar with, like nasal. I bet you know where nasal is. I think you might be able to guess where brachial is. Cranial, manus. There might be some ones you already know of. So try and name as many as you can on that sheet, and then you can answer it here. We'll practice this in class. We'll actually use the mannequins in class, so let's make the video shorter. This is in your textbook if you want to go reference it. These big black ones are bigger regions that there are smaller regions within. So your dorsal region has many sub-regions within. Your manus is a big region, and the digital region, is within your manus. Carpal, I would even argue, is kind of right around your manus. The pedal area has many regions within. So those big bolded terms in your unit packet are regions. Probably one of the hardest ones, just to put this out there now, is inguinal. Let's see if I can find where inguinal is. And that's the groin area. This is actually kind of a bigger area, but it's kind of that whole V-shaped area that is your groin. That's your inguinal area. Okay, and then lastly, the last schema, the little sub-schema. So this is the last schema of the 4. The last one is body cavities. And the 2 biggest body cavities are the dorsal and ventral. So the ventral body cavity is what's in red. The dorsal is what's in gold. So there's only 2 mini body cavities within the dorsal, the cranial cavity and spinal cavity. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 body cavities within the ventral. And that is it. So again, finish that in your unit packet in the colored sheet, and you are done. See you guys in class.